Sometimes in life, you have to look at the mirror and realize that, you've got to be honest with yourself. You've got to make some sort of changes. Something has to happen within you as an individual to make for a better version of you and a better version of yourself for those around you, your loved ones, your family, all those sorts of people. And it really is the same thing with the video game industry and businesses in general. When something has been working and it no longer starts to work as it was intended, it no longer starts to seem to have the sizzle and flare that it had in years past, it's time to start thinking about a successor, a revision of the model. You already see where I'm going with this. And yes, it's time to be honest about the Nintendo Switch, especially now that we're nearing the end of 2022, because what used to be just an isolated thing here and there is now becoming a more frequent problem across all sorts of the medium, not just in terms of hardware as far as performance for games is concerned, but in terms of actual hardware sales and money generating revenue for this system. And that's where things start to get pretty interesting, because the video game industry is constantly evolving. When the PS5 and the Xbox Series X came out, we were literally in the middle of a pandemic. These have not been available in stores. Supplies have been pretty strict on these systems, whereas with Nintendo, you already had a bunch of systems manufactured, so it was much easier for you to find success with this, whereas developing the new hardware, it was more difficult to get your hands on it. But of course, the NPD is a report that comes out monthly, documenting the sales of physical games, sometimes digital games, and hardware sales in the United States for the previous month, which is a pretty large indication of how systems are selling, because really the United States is the biggest market in the world. So Matt Piscatella, who is from the NPD group, put out a tweet saying the following: US NPD hardware. Nintendo Switch ranks second in unit sales among hardware platforms in the month, while Xbox Series placed second in dollar sales, meaning that the PlayStation brand, the PlayStation 5 and all iterations, the digital system and of course the disc-based system, were number one in terms of sales and in dollar amount. Now, this is actually interesting because Nintendo Switch has dominated the NPD for literally years, but for the past 2 months, it's ranked number 2 in unit sales, meaning that there are getting more PlayStation 5s out into the marketplace. But what's concerning about this is that although in terms of hardware's sales and systems being sold, Xbox Series X placed number 3, in terms of dollar sales, it was number 2, meaning that when it comes to money generated from revenue generated from your system sales, the Nintendo Switch was in last place for this month. It was in last place, and that's a bit of a red flag. I feel like one time is a coincidence, back to back, then you got to kind of start looking at things, see why the market is sort of shifting away from you. You have to remember, the Nintendo Switch has been a ridiculously successful system. Nobody is downplaying that on this channel. I obviously love the system. Over 111 million units sold. But one thing that I've been saying this entire time when talking about the Switch and what's that future number going to be, where's the system going to sort of cap out in terms of systems sold, is that, well, it feels like we're getting to a point where everyone who's wanted a Nintendo Switch potentially has a Nintendo Switch. At least one Switch. Even some people have 2, 3. I probably have 4 or 5 because I have problems and I like to review some of the different units that come out. But realistically speaking, you get to a certain point in the market where everyone has the product that they want from you, and then there's no reason to pick it up again. You haven't given us a revised model. You haven't done anything in terms of that to sort of have double and triple dipping. Sure, you had the Nintendo Switch Lite, the Nintendo Switch OLED, but these were not necessarily upgrades. One was cheaper, one had a better screen, but in terms of power, in terms of running the games more efficiently, that's not something we've seen before. And that's kind of what we're going to segue into here, because when the sales are starting to stagnate, you have to look at the hardware and the system and the software for the system that's, going to be coming out. What software is coming out for the system? Obviously, there are still 2 huge titles to come with this system. Of course, the new Pokemon Scarlet and Violet and The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2. But I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about that because we really don't know a whole lot sort of beyond that. A Kirby remake, Fire Emblem Engage, which looks like a very safe emblem into the entry into the Fire Emblem franchise. But when you look at these games that are coming out, games like Bayonetta 3, games like Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, games like Alan Wake Remastered, which just came out on the system, you're starting to notice more and more technical problems, more and more restrictions, more and more limitations within these games. And that's not even coming from me. That's coming from sources that are usually very lenient towards Nintendo. Now, with the whole Alan Wake situation, yes, that was me. I bought that game and it sucks. It runs worse than the Xbox 360 version. It looks worse than the Xbox 360 version. Chalk it up to a bad port. But one game I always sort of go back to, of course, Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. There were some major performance issues with that game. When it comes to Bayonetta 3, we've had a couple hands-on previews that have gotten out there. And GameXplain, which, you know, I don't have beef with GameXplain or anything like that. I do think that they work pretty closely with a lot of these companies, so maybe sometimes they're not quite as honest as they should be or need to be, just in my opinion. I know a lot of people like them. But GameXplain got a hands-on preview of Bayonetta 3, and they reported in their hands-on preview that there were performance issues. There was things like frame rate issues and stuttering within the game, and that's not something you really want to hear. That's not something you want to hear about a new up-and-coming game that's really supposed to be showcasing this system, a unique title from Nintendo themselves, a unique game to have in their catalog. And when you look at something like Bayonetta 2, which mostly ran at 60 frames per second and was a smooth experience on the Nintendo Switch, it's like, well, why would the new game run worse? You could say the same thing about Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition was 60 frames per second. You were lucky to get 30 frames per second with Age of Calamity at times. But I think that the biggest concern right now is the fact that Pokemon Scarlet and Pokemon Violet previews have started to come out. Nintendo Life has done one on it, and pretty much the whole thing is them bitching about the graphics. So this is from Alex from Nintendo Life, who has literally been there forever. He seems like a super good dude. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet's performance distracts from neat new features and flourishes. So basically, the performance is not very good in the build we played. We were quite disappointed how the game ran in docked mode, and we were unable to test its handheld capabilities. There was plenty we did like a game, but we want to cover this hotly queried topic straight away. The game seems to be running on around 720p whenever you're in the overworld, with little to no anti-aliasing as far as we can tell, and maximum frame rate of 30 frames per second, which is not consistently achieved when running around the world in a reasonable manner. Objects and characters, that are only a few in-game meters from the player, run in busy scenarios at even a reduced rate, a technique used by a lot of games to prevent frame drops and poor performance elsewhere. But in this case, it's not enough to keep the master frame rate consistent. And looking at this game, I never got the feeling that this was a graphical powerhouse or anything like this. This is Game Freak we're talking about. And Game Freak, you know, you could say, well, maybe they're having struggles getting this game up and running, but where there's smoke, there's fire. And to have, you know, smeary textures and, you know, all sorts of weird stuff, very choppy manners and busy scenes, battle issues with frame rate issues and stuff like that, it's like, at some point in time, you have to think, well, maybe it's not the developers. Maybe it's not the developers that have had this Nintendo Switch hardware. A company like Platinum works very closely with Nintendo on Bayonetta 3. This game's been in development for 5 years. I don't want to hear about performance problems because you've been working on this game for 5 years. 5 years, okay? You've had this system for a very long time. Game Freak, you've had this system forever. You were probably literally the first company outside of Nintendo to have your hands on a Nintendo Switch. You can't get your games to run optimized on the platform, and it's not a really graphically taxing game. So I go back to my main point with this. It's time to be honest. It's time to be honest about the Nintendo Switch. It's a great system. Does it still have life left in it? Of course it does. Breath of the Wild 2 or Tears of the Kingdom has not come out yet. And until Tears of the Kingdom comes out, you probably won't hear any talk from Nintendo about a new system or a revised system or something like that. But the way that the Switch is built, you know, the fact that it's a handheld and a system that you can dock and play it as a console. The fact that it's based on mobile technology at the end of the day with the Tegra X1, and mobile technology is always growing, it's always changing, it's always shifting. The fact that you have things like the Steam Deck out on the marketplace that run a variety of third-party games. You know, it's essentially a mini PC in your hand for something almost the price of a Nintendo Switch that does big AAA games from like the PS4 era. You have to start realizing you got to keep up with the Joneses just a little bit. Just a little bit. That casual market absolutely loves Nintendo, and maybe that casual market is who Nintendo really goes after. Maybe they don't necessarily care about the people who care about things like graphics and frame rate and whatnot. But with President Furukawa, he definitely seems like a businessman. He seems like a savvy and shrewd businessman who doesn't do all the jokes that other presidents have done. He doesn't do all the sort of behind the scenes stuff like that. He seems to be really focused on the business aspect. And from a business perspective, when your sales are starting to go down in North America, and they'll probably spike around the holiday season, maybe the PlayStation 5 will get overtaken again. I could definitely see it doing better than the Xbox Series platforms because, I mean, there's really no games out for it yet, but 2023 is going to be the year of Xbox. But if I see these diminishing returns on my hardware, and I start to see major performance issues and major titles from companies that have been working with us since day one, I have to imagine that an incremental upgrade or a full-on successor has to be talked about very soon. You don't want to wait too long, and you don't want to do it too quickly. You don't want another Wii to Wii U situation. I don't think that would ever happen, but the Wii was such a huge phenomenon, and then it fizzled out, and Nintendo just kind of didn't know what to do with it, and they made a Wii U, which almost, you know, hurt the company in terms of optics and hurt the company in terms of revenue for many, many years. I still love my Nintendo Switch. I'm still going to be playing games on my Nintendo Switch. I still look forward to playing games that developers put a lot of time, effort, and care into, that utilize the hardware to its maximum capability. But I also would like to see something that's a little bit easier for developers to get into, where these games can look better and run better, and keep the Switch going. You don't have to make a full-on successor. That's where I think there's a big divide amongst consumers. Like, oh, it needs to be like a Nintendo Switch 2 or something like that. I don't think it does. Why not have something like an incremental upgrade to the Switch that just has a beefier processor and can do things like DLSS? Why would you not do that? That way you keep the Switch brand going, you keep the sales of the system going, you keep the standard Switch on the marketplace as a cheaper alternative, or you have this premium system that can run some games better, that can do some things that the Nintendo Switch base model can't do, but it still plays all the same games. Like, I don't understand why you would alienate anyone and anything within this when you have such success with your software sales. But in terms of hardware sales, you're starting to see that stagnation. You're starting to see potentially the end of the road. And, you know, I just can't let go. It's unnatural. You belong to me. I belong to you. It's a good song. I like Boyz II Men. They were pretty dope. Boyz II Men was a good group. But yeah, so that's all I got to say about this. We need to be honest about it. And as much as I love this, as much as this thing has been life-changing for me in terms of playing games and enjoying games, and really life-changing for me in terms of, you know, making me money by talking about it, I feel like we're at the end of the road with this. I feel like it's time to let go. And I know it's unnatural because, you know, I belong to it and it belongs to me, but you got to be real. You got to be honest. I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.